My name is Emily, and I live in a relatively small town called Meadowgrove, about 3 hours by car from London. My mother abandoned me when I was 5 years old. She never loved me much. She got pregnant at a time that wasn't convenient for her. She was still young and wanted to live her life, pursue her dreams and desires. She felt unjustly trapped by a simple mistake that had ruined her life forever. Despite her resentment, she raised me in her own way. I'm sure she did it more out of fear of what others would say than out of love. If she had abandoned me, everyone would have pointed fingers at her, and since my mother lived for appearances, that was her greatest fear. She never said it outright, but I deduced it over time. I've always been good at figuring things out. My father used to tell me that she despised me and treated me badly. I remember when I was little, she would feed me with a fork, sometimes pushing the food so hard that it hurt my throat. But those were just details. The worst was when she left me hungry and crying, and still, she would hit me to make me stop. Or when she served me a huge plate of food and wouldn't let me leave the table until I finished it, even if it got dark, and I was still sitting there with the cold food in front of me. In the end, everything turned out okay. She ran off with a truck driver without even saying goodbye to me or my father. She fled from the bad choice she had made. My father only found out when he returned from work. He never imagined she had a lover. He even called the police to report her missing, but everyone ended up laughing at him. At first, my father drank a lot to forget her. She was beautiful and attractive, and he always thought that over time, she would come to love me. But following my grandmother's advice and with the passage of time, he grew stronger, became more serious, and dedicated himself to taking care of me the best he could. He always told me he would never leave me alone. As I grew up, it was just the two of us. I looked a lot like my mother, which made me angry. My body, my face, everything about her was in me. My father, on the other hand, pampered me a lot. I spent years sleeping with him to feel safer. Sometimes I would hear him crying, although he tried to hide it well. On those days, he would hug me tightly. In my adolescence, I came to hate my mother, but today, I feel nothing for her. When I finished high school, I lost the desire to discover the world. I dedicated myself to working. It wasn't hard to find a job in my town. There's a stationery store near our house where they can never keep employees. The owner is weird, and her husband is an insufferable old man, but since I know how to deal with bitter people, I've been there for 2 years. I'm not worried about getting fired. If that happens, there's always Tesco. All my friends work there. It's the final destination for anyone who finishes high school. Since it's not a difficult job, I managed to balance work and household chores well. My father was always a hard worker, and that kept him sane. He spent a lot of time on construction sites, which usually lasted from 6 to 9 months. When one job ended, there was almost always another one waiting. He earned well and loved spending money on me as if I were his wife. So yes, I was a pampered girl living a comfortable life. That town was the only place that made my father happy, so I never considered moving. Even though everyone knew our life story, which sometimes bothered me, the roots we had planted there were so deep that if we had to leave for any reason, I'm sure my father would get sick. Everyone knew him. With every step he took down the street, someone would greet him. If my mother had never been mentioned, it would have been perfectly possible to continue life as if she had never existed. Over time, I started to feel jealous of him. It was as if he had replaced my mother, and as I grew into a woman, I became more aware of how my father remained a gallant, serious, humble, and quiet man. These traits impressed me in a man, and consequently, every time he showed them, I would tell him I didn't want to know her and tried to make him spend more time with me than usual. I told him that if he brought another woman into the house, I would leave. Obviously, this was toxic behavior, but my father's attention was the most valuable thing to me. I didn't want to share it. I had no siblings, so I was used to having all the support he always gave me. Interestingly, I also noticed his jealousy when I told him I was talking to someone and that I liked them. He would visibly become more nervous, but he always knew how to handle it. In the end, I didn't have a partner. I only cultivated malicious and lustful thoughts, which I quickly pushed out of my mind. But when these thoughts appeared, my body reacted, showing me what I really liked. My relationship with my father has always been very close. He was never shy with me and would change in front of me when he got out of the shower, thinking I wasn't looking. After all, in his mind, why would a daughter be interested in her own father? We always talked openly about anything and were never religious, which meant we didn't feel guilty or reprimanded for anything. At least, that's how my mind worked. It allowed me to think whatever I wanted, explore, and understand myself better every day. I'm a simple girl who enjoys the little things in life. Once, I told all this to a friend. She was the only girl among 4 brothers and grew up in a home where everything was considered wrong. If it were up to her family, she would be the embodiment of the purest country girl. I laughed a lot with her because I knew she wasn't a saint. On the contrary, she openly told me about her adventures, and I loved hearing them. She would tell me about her escapades and how she caught each of her brothers doing things they shouldn't. They went to church every Sunday and seemed like one of those perfect families from medical insurance commercials. But as she herself told me, on Tuesdays, when all the adults in the house went to work, the kids would take out their father's promiscuous tapes from a locked drawer and watch them, laughing at each other. I didn't ask her how she found out about this, because I was more interested in telling her about the day I teased my father just for fun. He had just gotten out of the shower, and my father was in the living room watching a game and drinking beer. I figured it must have been his third, so he should be smiling and spontaneous. That's when I dried off a bit and wrapped myself in a towel. I approached him, holding each end of the towel, and opened it, saying, "Hey, Dad, do you think I'm pretty?" He kept his mouth slightly open and didn't breathe for about 3 seconds, his eyes scrutinizing every part of me. I laughed, covered myself again, and ran out of the room. It was very funny. He kept making a fool of himself, telling me to stop playing these games, but I knew he didn't mean it. I always played like that with him. My friend was scandalized by my stories, but was very happy to know that her friend was crossing the line and doing things she probably would do too. We've known each other since we were young and are great friends. I felt comfortable telling her anything, but of course, there were things I didn't tell her. One of those things happened on a Saturday afternoon when I was at home with my father. I had already cleaned the house, and was in that good mood you get from a clean house and a full stomach. I had prepared his favorite meal, and he was happier than usual. I lay down on his lap, and he stroked my head. I felt so satisfied being with him. You know that saying about having a child to take care of you when you're old? Well, I realized I was that child. I was born unwanted by my mother, but to my father, I was his greatest gift. I realized that if I had to love him more, and if loving more meant loving like lovers, there wouldn't be much difference. The next day, we would behave as if nothing had happened. I was lying on my side, starting to squirm and moan very softly, almost inaudibly. A generic Jackie Chan movie was playing on TV, one of those that clearly seemed to be about money laundering, but I wasn't paying attention. I was touching myself, running one foot over the other. My stomach started to tingle, and my little cave, my spring, began to flush as the blood circulated faster, and my heart came to life, pounding in my chest. I kept smoothing his knee while he stroked my head. I tossed the blanket between my legs and let my skin turn white in contrast to the slightly darker room. I knew I must have caught my father's attention, because his head tilted subtly toward the space between the TV and the window, allowing him to see that his daughter's things were showing more than usual. Knowing I had his attention, I adjusted myself to achieve two things: bring my head closer to the jeans that made me and show the result at that moment. I thought, "Look, Dad, what your brush created. Look how well you paint." Little did he know that I had been wondering for a long time what the paint tasted like. That feeling was magical, the desire to give yourself, to use your hand more. You become foolish, and the prolonged period of celibacy I was in made it even more dangerous as I embarked on these thoughts. I started to feel the swelling under my left cheek growing hot beneath the fabric of his jeans. It seemed like he was trying to control himself, his breathing becoming slower as he struggled with all his might not to disrespect his little girl. Such a good daughter, always doing what she was told, a model daughter to anyone who saw her grow up. So the fact that she was lying on him didn't mean he had to relax. But that's how it was. I pretended to stretch, making an exaggerated stretching motion, closing my eyes, opening my mouth, and pushing my hand up. My hand took a long time to rise, because I wanted to feel that bulge, and at the moment I felt it, the back of my finger rested on the pole that was now throbbing violently. I bit the tip of my lower lip, my eyes starting to close, as calm as I was, light, almost floating, drugged by some natural substance my body must have been releasing at that moment. My movements rarely ceased. I always found some reason to move. I would bring up a topic, lift my head, and park my mouth near the source. The stockings I was wearing were too thin to be worn at home, and with my movements, I managed to pull the fabric up to the tip of my father's flesh. I realized that he no longer seemed to mind my movements. The caresses on my head turned into subtle pushes toward the source of his ecstasy. Sometimes he would scratch my cheek, just to have an excuse to make a repetitive movement over the reason for my existence. I would gasp and then break into a fake yawn to disguise it. He had learned from his daughter by this point. The head was already peeking out. I had never seen him so firm. I wanted to get intimate with that part of him that he keeps hidden. I came from there, it makes sense to me. I had managed to mess it up a few times, but those were rare occasions, like the time I pretended to be asleep to watch when he got out of the bath. I saw the thing swinging heavily, and my mouth started to open on its own. Now, lying on his lap, I was looking at it. It seemed like it was about to burst, desperate, and the best part was that it didn't stop. It kept throbbing arrogantly, as if it wanted to enter somewhere. But where would that be? I thought about fiddling with my phone to lean on him, to see how he would react, how he could be like this with his daughter. I started talking to him about my friend, but it was just to keep opening and closing my mouth with his nerve right next to it. It was very close, right in the corner. I laughed just to open my mouth wider, and with the kicks the tent was giving me, it was almost as if I was sucking it disguised. None of it was wrong. It was just the love of a daughter and a father who always took care of me. I turned around and lay on my stomach on the sofa. That thing was now in my face without any shame. That's how it was, that's how it had to be. It pointed up like a rocket without brakes, whole and shiny. It was that castle inviting you to talk about it. It was like a child who had just received a gift, talking just to talk, playing with the phone, letting that offense stick to my hand at will. If I wanted to, I could fall there and stay forever. If I could, my panties no longer hid anything, and my father's hand went there to seek refuge, something to squeeze to relieve the desperation of wanting to dive into some nearby spring. If it was his daughter's, even better. If he looked a little lower, he would find a place to hide 2 fingers. My slit cried non-stop, wanting comfort, wanting the warmth of a body, wanting to ride, to exist only for this. I wanted someone to tell me that I existed only for this, and that I was fulfilling my purpose as a woman. I pretended to sing Hello, a song just to dance to its rhythm in this dance. I made those fingers follow their course faster. My father asked what song it was, and I told him I made it up on the spot, making him laugh. In the song, there was a word that made all the difference in the world: sink. Every time I sang it, I left my mouth open, and my fingers went all the way in. That's when I put down the phone and put my right hand in the castle's garden. I closed my eyes and savored every millimeter of nerve that crossed the boiling space between my tongue and palate. My brain screamed, "I'm loving my father, I'm loving my father, what indescribable, immeasurable pleasure." He didn't say anything, he knew I was doing the right thing. At the moment I let it fill my mouth, it was as if he had been stabbed. Scared, he froze, crumbled, and I restarted him. I made a before and after in his existence. His left hand rested heavily on my neck, and he begged me by everything sacred not to stop, and obviously, I wasn't going to. It was my moment to shine. I didn't even know I was that good. I didn't let my teeth touch him even once. Sometimes I let my lips rest on the garden for several seconds, the tip of the tower getting lost somewhere between my carotids. Meanwhile, two of his fingers sought refuge, venturing into the warmth of that slit that I always kept soft and velvety. The whole thing was very tense, and since I know my father isn't one to burst out laughing, I knew it was a matter of seconds before I drank the most precious of milks. What really left me frozen was what was coming: the explosion, the screen going black, and I knew it. A loud thud, like that of a bear, took over the whole house. It wasn't just relief, it was more like the desire of a whole life to get out of that channel, to find my satisfaction. And indeed, I was getting hungry. I had made the food but not the dessert. Luckily, my father had one for me, very thick and creamy, nutritious, and full of protein, which I obviously didn't let go to waste. I didn't see it, he didn't see it, everything was in its place. The man put all my hair in his hand, and a desperation that lasted about 12 seconds was very intense, more than I can describe. The swelling that lasted between my mouth during this period didn't even allow me to move my head to swallow the last drop. After that, my father collapsed on the sofa, defeated, conquered, almost dead, with a full belly and an empty sack. He had done a great job. A few seconds later, he fell asleep, exhausted. Surely those were the 12 best seconds of his life. With him practically dead lying there, I lowered my belly, brought my left hand to the sauce, took out a little of what it produced, and raised it a bit. There I gave myself completely, still very fast, trembling and screaming. I didn't care if anyone saw me from the window in that situation, surely they would have loved it. They would have seen all the remnants of sin, and even seen what a good daughter I am. I fell asleep very quickly when I relaxed.